let's take a look at how to solve that customer onboarding challenge. I'm going to go ahead and build this bot from scratch so that you can see what we're doing as we do it. And I'm going to start off by creating a single task bot. Most of these challenges are created so that you can solve them with just one bot. You don't have to build child bots necessarily. You could always break it up that way, but I'm just going to keep this simple and create a single bot for this challenge. And so I'm going to call this one Customer Onboarding. And I put this into its own little folder here in Bots Pathfinder Academy Challenge Pages, just for organizational purposes only. Always good to keep things from getting too messy in your control rooms. I'm also going to be displaying this in dual view so that you can both watch the flow view and the list view, depending on which one you prefer. Now, thinking about this process, if we take a look at the onboarding site that we're going to be working with here, we've got the customer onboarding information down here with the name, ID, contact, street address, city, state, zip, email. And then at the bottom here, we've got some choices for active discount offered and non-disclosure agreement, along with a register button. But what we first need to do is we need to download this CSV file. So I'm going to go and just save this out to my CBots folder that I keep handy on this computer just for such purposes. And the file name is Customer Onboarding Challenge CSV. So I'm going to keep that in memory and hit save. All right, that's downloaded. It's a pretty small file. Yes, find my downloads here. I got it. Thank you very much. But let's go ahead and take a look at that file while we're at it. We can open it up either here or from that downloads page. And by default, this CSV is coming up in Microsoft Excel. And here we go. Now, the neat part about this challenge is that you don't necessarily have to have Microsoft Excel installed on your computer. Since this is a CSV file, we are free to use either the Excel Advanced package or the text CSV package. Either one works quite nicely. So in this case, we can see that we do have a header row. That's nice. That allows us to identify these columns by that header row instead of having to use the index where column A is 0, column B is 1, etc. And then the other information here just pretty much lines up quite nicely with what we've got in our web form. The offers, discounts, and the non-disclosure on file are all either uppercase yes or uppercase no, so that makes it really easy to figure out which one we're going to be using for this process. So for instance, if we were entering the information for this first one, this Pathfinder Roofing and Siding, taking a look down here, the offers discounts is yes, and the non-disclosure on file is also a yes, meaning that when it is time to fill this form out, we're going to hit yes for the active discount, and we're going to tick this box for the non-disclosure agreement. Notice I do have this page open already. The URL may be different on your challenge page, but it'll all work essentially the same. I like to keep these as two separate windows. In fact, you can even have them on two separate browsers. You could have your control room open up in Firefox, and you could have your working browser being Chrome. Any combination of that. But I do like to have these windows separated just for clarity's sake. Now, thinking about this, I've got really three logical pieces to this. The first one is to prepare everything. Open up that CSV, open up the browser, get ready, prepare anything that we need to do. So that's going to be in our first step. Our second step is to loop through all of those customers and take that information and put that into the web form. And then finally, the third step, just close everything. Now, in these challenge exercises, I tend to leave the browser open because at the end it kind of gives you a timer saying how long it took and what your accuracy was. So we'll leave the browser open in this case, but best practice dictates that under normal circumstances, we'd want to close that browser. So to start off here, I'm going to go ahead and start with the step actions. And I'm just going to drag 3 of them into place here, like that. I like to keep the names of these steps pretty short too, just so that they show up correctly in this flow view. So for this first step, I'm just going to call this one Open CSV and Browser. Again, it doesn't have to be all that descriptive, just a basic heading of what you're going to be doing here. For the second step, I'm just going to call this one Loop Through Customers. And for the last step, I'm going to just call this one Close the CSV. Normally that would be Close Everything, or we'd close the browser too. Now that doesn't mean that I can't mix and match a little bit between these. I could, put in different actions in any of these, but just giving us a nice little, almost like a new paragraph marker if you were typing this out, where this is all going to be together, this is all going to be together, and this is all going to be together. Steps are beautiful for that, and the ability to turn them off, to disable their actions, to roll them up. It just makes for a much more, I guess, clean and sorted development environment as you go through these things. Now, the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to open the CSV. And the reason I'm going to open the CSV first is this is a timed challenge. And I want to optimize the amount of time it's taking for this challenge as much as possible. Now, in the real world, timing is not the primary focus of your automations. Accuracy is. Because if you have an inaccurate bot, regardless of how fast it is, you've lost the war. So always, always, always focus on that reliability too. But let's go ahead and open up this CSV. Just drag that into the first step. I'm going to do the lazy man's thing here for the session name and leave it as default. And the reason I'm doing this is just so I don't have to remember to change that elsewhere in this automation. Your Center of Excellence may actually give you a different guidance for that, changing the session name to things like the file name. Follow their guidance, not necessarily mine. For the file path, this file is on my C drive, so I'm going to choose desktop file. If I had previously uploaded that to the control room, I could choose control room file. But in this case, since this is a list of things that, at least in theory, in the real world, would change, probably want to leave that on like a C drive or some sort of a network share. Let's go ahead and browse over to that file. And that's in the bot's Customer Onboarding Challenge. There we go. We know that this file does contain a header, so we can leave that as such. What we don't know is what is our delimiter. So I'm just going to pop this open in Notepad++, and I can see that my delimiter here is a comma. Now that can change depending on what country you're in. So never take that for granted. So I'll leave my delimiter as comma, and then I'm always turning these guys on with very, very few exceptions, because there's really a problem when you come up to some sort of a data bit that has a space at the end, and then you're trying to compare it against a value that doesn't have a space at the end, and it doesn't work. Trimming these leading and trailing spaces really can be a lifesaver for that. Now also, this file, and I probably shouldn't have closed it. Let me reopen it up in Notepad, Notepad++ or Notepad. I can see that the encoding on this file is UTF-8 format. So for this, I'm going to make sure that my encoding matches this. Now, if you don't have that matching, when you run your bot, the bot will actually stop and say, hey, your encoding is wrong, and then you can just correct it from there. All right, so I've got the CSV open, and the next thing I need to do is I need to open up my browser. So let's go ahead and drag that in here. I'm going to be opening this browser in a new window. Best practice dictates that you do not use default browser here. I know it is literally the default, the first entry here, but best practice says to select the specific browser that you want to work with. And that's because later on you'll see that as we use these recorder capture actions to fill in the web form, those are hard-coded to a specific browser. And if you leave that as default browser and run this on a computer whose default browser is not Chrome, like mine, my default browser is Firefox, then it's not going to work correctly. So I'm going to force that to open up in Chrome. And my link to open, I'll go ahead and just copy and paste that from this page. This is also a good idea to do. That way you don't get surprised by having a typo in your page or something else. So I've got that customer onboarding challenge.html. So that's great. At this point, my timer is starting as soon as this page opens up. So I want to make sure that I don't mess around and do other things before starting to fill in that form. Clock is running for this challenge. So that being said, I need to go down to my second action here, and it's looping through the customers. So that already implies that we're going to be using that loop action. Pop that in place here. For the iterator type, I'm going to be looping through each row in that CSV text. My session name I left as default because I was lazy before. I'm going to be lazy here and leave that as default. But again, follow your COE's direction on that. Now, I need to assign that row that we're working with to a variable. In other words, I'm going to be looping through these one row at a time: Pathfinder, Flashpoint, Crooked Nail, Hat Store, etc. Because of that, I need some place to store that row that I'm processing. So I'm going to create a new record variable. Now this record variable is named CSV text row. That's fine. One of the naming schemes that we use in our training is to use a lowercase letter that tells us what type of variable it is. So this is a record variable. I'm going to put a lowercase r in front of this. So it'll be r CSV text row. You could even simplify it more, or again, follow the guidance of your center of excellence for this. And that's all I really need to do. I can't even change the type here, no matter how many times I click. And that's great because that means I can't accidentally create this variable with the wrong data type. So I love using these create variable widgets that are here. All right, let's click on that create and select, and we've got our record variable in place. Now, since that holds a row of data, that also allows us to get to each column of data too. And the way we do this is based on the header row. Remember, when we opened up that CSV, we selected the option that says this file contains a header. And indeed, it does. So if we were reading this Hat Store row here, and I said, give me the Hat Store, or give me the row of data that I'm working on, and give me the primary contact column. Well, that's going to be Mitch Manders. Give me the zip column. Well, that's going to be this 34578, and so on and so forth. So this gets us all of the data that we need to get without having to go cell by cell. So it's a much faster process to loop through it like this. Now, that being said, the next thing we need to do is we need to actually start filling in our web form. And to do that, I'm going to be using the recorder capture action. recorder capture action is what allows us to manipulate the user interface. And it's pretty easy to use. If you're using Chrome or even the new Edge browser, both of those are Chromium based, then you choose Window. If you're using any other application, and actually including Chrome and Edge too, you can always use Application. So that's up to you on which one you want to use. I'm going to use Browser because this is optimized for the Chrome browser. I do need to hit this Refresh Windows button though, because I need to get a listing of those windows that are open before I hit this Choose a Browser tab. Now in here, I'm going to choose the window title for that window. Notice this is my control room's title. As I float over there, you can see the tooltip shows that that's my control room, so I don't want to automate my control room. So I'm going to choose Customer Onboarding here. All that looks great. And the next thing I need to do is I need to capture that object. And the first object I've got on my list here is my customer name. So I'm going to move down here, wait for that to get red highlighted like this, and click once. When I do this, Automation 360 software essentially just records all the information I need to uniquely find that one text box on the page. And if we look a little bit closer on this, if I hit the right button, we can see that we've got an input with an ID of customer name. So this makes it really, really easy to locate the specific field that we're going for. Now, some of this information is not going to be human readable, such as the path, but that still allows us to uniquely identify that one text box on the page. Now, your Center of Excellence may have you do things like turn off some of these properties in cases of working with web pages, for example. I've heard of some companies turning off the path. It's not necessary, but again, you'll want to follow their direction. And if you do need to do that, you can just open up the object properties fully, scroll down to that property that you want to get rid of, and turn that off. Now, generally speaking, you don't want to do any of those things again, unless your Center of Excellence tells you to do so. So I'm going to leave it exactly as it was with all of those properties in place. The next thing I need to do is I need to tell it what to do with that text box. And what I want to do here is to set the text. I'm going to use this keystrokes option to put information into this text box. There's really two ways of getting this done, and that is we can have it insert those keystrokes one at a time, or we can set the text box to a value all at once. And all of that is managed by this time between keystrokes. But back here at the keystrokes here, where they enter the keystrokes here, I'm going to hit this little X in a box to insert a value. And I'm going to choose my record variable, our CSV text row. And for the name of the column, I'm going to go back over here, and it's going to be company name. So I'll type this in exactly as shown. Now, it's not technically case sensitive, but if you keep it case sensitive, everyone's happy, right? So I'm going to pop that in there, and this will now set that value of that company name into that field. Now, if I wanted to, I could actually test this at this point. Could say, okay, I need to look at this. It would fill in the different company names from that CSV, and that would be a good test of just that first field. But let's continue on and see if we can just put everything in here, and if there's any problems, we can troubleshoot it then. Another way that I like to save some time is copy and paste. So I can use this three-dot menu and select copy, three-dot menu again, and select paste after action. I can also use Control-C and Control-V, which I'll probably do a little bit later. Now, when I have this copy in place and it is selected, I can now just hit this recapture object. Notice I don't have to go through all this mess up here because I've already done it once. So I can now recapture object, and I can say, okay, the next field that I want to work with is this customer ID. And if I really want to get sneaky, I can even go in here and change this column to what we've got over here, customer ID. Let's just do a copy and paste from here as well, so we don't have any typos. And done. So you can see that you could actually do this really, really quickly. Let me do this at full speed so you can see how quickly you can do this. I'm going to hit Control-C, Control-V. That made the duplicate. I'm going to hit recapture object, select my primary contact, go down here, change that column name. Let's see what it is supposed to be. It's supposed to be primary contact. So with some practice, you can really knock these out and make that copy and paste process very, very fast. Alrighty. So that was primary contact. The next one's going to be our street address. So I'll do another Control-C, Control-V, recapture my object, grab that street address, and change this to street address. Make sure my memory didn't fail me. Nope, we're good. Next one over is city. If I get to the right window. Okay, this is for city. Next one over is state. Control-C, Control-V. Now the state's slightly different because it is a drop-down list box. And we can see that here, control type is combo box. So the action to take on that object, you notice that set text is really not here. Instead, what we want to do is we want to select the item by text. We want to select the specific item from the drop-down by the text. Now to do this, I need to take another quick look at this drop-down. And indeed, the states listed here are the 2-digit abbreviations for the state. So that's a good sign, because what we've got here in our source file is also the 2-digit abbreviations for these. So that's good. So let's switch back over here. Select item by text is fine. We don't need to do any translation. But again, we'll use that insert a value, choose our record variable. The column name is state. And there we go. So really, these drop-down list boxes are not much more difficult than anything else that you're going to be working with. It's just a slightly different way of doing it. Copy paste again. And I think this will be our zip. Yep, that is what it is. So we will recapture our object. This will be the zip. Action to take on that object is going to be a set text. Notice it didn't keep what we had from the copy paste because the previous one was the drop down. But it should be fine from here on. I could have copied and pasted another one instead. Okay, the next one over is email address. So we'll copy paste, recapture, set text looks good. Put in email address. Notice I'm putting quotes around this because it has a space in there, whereas the prior one, zip, doesn't have a space, so it didn't put quotes around it. I could put quotes around this as well, wouldn't harm anything. Okay, continuing looking at our data, we just finished off with email address. Next one is our discount column. Now the discount column has either a yes or a no option in there. And if we take a look at this web form, if I bring up a fresh copy of it, you can see that these radio buttons do not have a default set. So that means for that to say yes in that column, I do need to explicitly select yes. And where it says no, I need to explicitly say no. Many times these radio buttons do have a default set to them, in which case you would only have to take care of like the negative or the positive condition, depending on the opposite of which one was selected. So let's go ahead and switch back over here. And since I've got a decision to make, I'm going to use the if action. And this if action is what's going to allow me to decide whether I'm going to click that yes or the no on the radio button. Now remember that everything that we're working with as far as our data goes is in that record variable. But each individual column of that record variable is a string. So for this if action, I'm going to actually choose string condition, which seems a little strange. It seems like you should choose record, which isn't an option, by the way. So just so that you don't get confused with this, you'll use a string condition for this. I'm going to choose my record variable, and I'm going to put in the specific column name, which is offers discounts. Now, if that is equal to yes, and I can keep it all uppercase, or if I'm not sure about the case, I can always untick this match case checkbox. And what I'm going to do here inside this if is I can do another copy paste. I'm going to copy 13, then select 14 and paste. And that allows me to paste inside the if. I can then recapture, and this time I'm going to capture just that radio button for yes. Just like that. And the action to take on that object is select. I could also use click or left click. Just depends on how you want to deal with that. Now, what about if the discount thing says no? I don't need to put in another if. I can actually add an else action right next to the if like this. Let me squish this around a bit so you can see it better. And I'm going to copy and paste again. I'm going to copy 15, select 16, paste, and now I've got a duplicate of this yes and no, but I'm going to recapture the object because I need to select the no, and that's all I need to change. So fairly easy with this. The last bit of data here is our non-disclosure on file. I know I'm going to put a typo on that, so I'm going to copy this to the clipboard. I'm sure I'm going to mess that up. But I have another decision to make. Now, this decision is actually going to be easier than the previous one because the checkbox by default comes up unchecked. So essentially, the no condition is already taken care of. All we have to worry about is the yes. So I'm going to add another if after this if. I'm going to base this off a string condition again from my record variable. Paste in that column name so I don't have a typo. And if that equals to yes, again, you can turn off the match case if you want to. And I'm going to copy another of those recorder captures from up here. Copy, select 18 and paste. and recapture my object. This time it will be the checkbox. And the action to take on that object, I'm going to go ahead and check that. So there are some other options here like toggle. So if it was already checked, that would uncheck it and vice versa. Or you can force it to be checked or unchecked. And in our case, we're just going to leave that as check. Now that's the last thing we have to do as far as the input data, but there's one more thing that we need to do here in the form, and that is to click the register button. Now we're going to stay within the bounds of this loop action, and you can see the bounds here in this gray box. The outside one with the blue outline is actually part of the step, then inside is the loop itself. So I'm going to add one more recorder capture in here, and I'm going to put it after that if because I want it to happen in all cases. I'm going to choose that previously selected window title and capture my register button. And the action I'm going to take is click. Now that handles all of the looping through the customers itself, so no problems there. That leaves us with our last step. And let me kind of show you something cool with these steps. I can actually collapse these other steps like this, and kind of shows me, hey, I'm done with this. I've cleaned up my workspace a little bit. Now I can focus a little bit more on just this last step. And of course, you can always expand it or contract it as you needed to. Now, the last thing I need to do here is to close my CSV. And since I didn't change that session name from default before, this is pretty easy. I'm ready to test this, so I'm going to close my other window. I don't want two windows with the same title open at the same time. That can cause some messiness. So let's go ahead and hit run and see what we get. Bot is running. Windows launched. And there it goes, putting in the information into the form, registering. And I'm seeing different options for those checkboxes and the radio buttons, so that's good. Keeping fingers crossed for a 100% accuracy here. Yahoo! And there we go. Our time was 32 seconds at 100% accuracy. Again, the important one here really is that accuracy. The time, okay, it's nice to have your automations run at a good clip so that they don't take too much time, but you've got to focus on that accuracy. That has got to be number one. And looks like we did okay, so we finished our challenge. Thanks for watching, and go be great.